Hi there, I'm Mary Susie from Bead Me a Story. Thanks so much for joining me today. We're going to do yet another beaded stretch bangle today. And you can see I've done this one in nautical colors for summer. I have some Christmas colors here. And then we also have a purple version that's got some striped beads in it. So I want to do some nice bright colors this week. But I have done this before. Before we start the tutorial, I am going to give you a little bit more information about seed beads so that you know why there are two tutorials for this and what's different about them. And the main difference is the type of beads that I'll be using. So I'm going to explain the different types of beads so that when you go to make these yourself, you'll understand that this one uses a 20 gauge jump ring, and I'm using a smaller O-ring too, a 5mm O-ring, and then we're doing this today with Czech beads. The last tutorial that I did, I used Japanese seed beads, and the sizes are going to be very, very different because the manufacturers of the seed beads make them quite differently. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to go ahead and start with some information about the beads, and then we will jump right into the tutorial. Hi there. So before we start today's tutorial, I wanted to go over something very important with you, which is talking a little bit about seed beads. So I have put the beaded bangle stretch bracelet out before, and there is another video for it. And I just want to point out that that video would use either of these two beads over on the left-hand side. So this teal colored one that you see, this is a Toho bead, and it's manufactured in Japan. And this is a Miyuki bead, and that is also manufactured in Japan. And I just want you to notice that if I put all these together, everything to the right of those two is a Czech bead. So if I show you these up close, I just want to point out that that Miyuki looks a little bit wider than all the rest. So don't ever expect the different manufacturers of seed beads to be uniform with each other. You can see that there's a difference in all of these. The Toho is shaped just a little bit differently. It's not quite as rounded on the outside edges. This one's the Miyuki, the purple one. Okay, the kind of amethyst purple one. And then the rest of these are Czech beads. Okay, so let me pull these off the string. I just wanted to show them to you both ways so you can see them strung and then from the side. So I'll just point out that the Toho and the Miyuki have much larger holes than what you see on the Czech beads. And you can also see that this purple Czech bead is a little bit smaller. And you can see that this black sitting next to this striped bead, I'll pick these up for you, that this black bead is a little bit smaller than this white one with stripes. Okay, and that I mean by this height, which is probably very hard for you to see in the videos, but I'm just pointing out the fact that the Czech beads are going to vary a lot more in size than the Japanese beads. So the previous video that I did using Japanese seed beads, that can bear an 18 gauge 3/16 jump ring. Sometimes I'll use 19 gauge jump rings with them, but it can withstand a little bit larger jump ring and a little bit larger gauge because these holes are so large. But now when we come over here into the Czech seed beads, and mostly Preciosa. Preciosa is the main brand that manufactures reliable seed beads from the Czech Republic. I'm sure there's some others, but that's the main one. These are going to vary, and the hole is much, much smaller. So I've got fairly uniform holes that I'm showing you, but I can kind of see with my eyes that this one on this eggshell color is a little bit smaller. So the benefit of this is when you're seed beading, when you're using string, it's actually advantageous to have a slightly smaller hole. And I do have certain projects that I'll do with Czech seed beads, and I don't want to do with Japanese seed beads because this hole is so large that it's going to kind of flop around on the string, because even the needle, you can see, is not filling up that hole. This hole is tremendously sized. So, you know, great to use sometimes, but you can kind of decide when you're making a project, you know, what you're really going to need. If you need things to be a little bit tighter, then you're going to want to use a Czech seed bead. If you need a little bit looser size, then you're going to use a Japanese seed bead. And for chainmail, when we use the Czech seed beads, you're going to have to use a 20 gauge wire for your jump ring, because it's just not going to fit otherwise. And the other thing is too, because jump rings are round, you might need a little bit larger size. So I generally find with the Czech seed beads, I tend to use 20 gauge 5/32 jump rings a lot with the size 6 Czech seed beads. Okay, and then when I come to the Japanese seed beads, I can get away with a 19 gauge or an 18 gauge jump ring, and it'll work just fine. Now, that is not to say that every single bead is going to go on your jump ring. You may have to throw some off to the side, and the same thing here. Even though you're using 20 gauge jump rings, which is very, very small, you may have to throw some off to the side, because again, these are not uniform. Okay, so the tutorial I'm going to show you today, we're going to be using the Czech seed beads. The tutorial I did previously used the Japanese seed beads. I put all the supply lists in the description of the video, so you can go there to find out what I'm using exactly, and it'll take you to my website if you copy the link, and you can kind of see the parameters of everything that I'm showing you. But I wanted to make a point of showing the different sizes and manufacturers of seed beads, so that you know when you go to buy supplies because you want to remake something, that there is quite a big difference in these two things. As far as Miyuki and Toho go, you can see that there's a pretty big difference in the size, how wide these are. I found the Miyuki to be the largest, and the Toho seems to have by far the largest hole usually, and that may just be my perception of it, but it has a very large hole to it. So these can kind of be used interchangeably but not together. And then the Czech seed beads, like I said, will need a completely different gauge of wire in order to go through them. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the video and showing you how to make this bracelet. Okay, so in order to do this weave in these sizes, I am going to do this the exact same way as I did it in the larger size. I'm going to, for the first row, pick up one O-ring. I've got my jump rings pre-opened, just so I can move a little faster in the video. I'm going to pick up one bead, and I'm going to pick up one O-ring. Okay, and then I will go ahead and close this jump ring. Okay, now it's really important with this particular weave to get these jump rings closed nicely. I will also mention here too that you can use steel. So if you want this to be a little bit more sturdy, you can certainly use steel jump rings in the same size, and it'll work great. Okay, so let me dump some of these on the table, or actually move this so I can reach them better. Okay, so now we have our first row, and our second row is going to be made up of the same things. We're going to use 2 rubber O-rings, 1 bead, and 1 jump ring. So I'm going to go ahead and take my jump ring. I'm going to pick up the bead first. This is going to make this land in the middle of the row. I'll pick up my rubber O-ring. I'm going to, this is the hardest row to get started, so I'm going to squeeze my O-rings together around the bead, and then I'm going to pass through the first O-ring from the inside to the, from the outside to the inside, and then I'm going to pass through the second O-ring from the inside to the outside. Now, I'll go ahead and grab my second O-ring for this particular row. And I just want to point out here that this very first row is going to bend backwards the entire time you're working. Okay, so let me get this closed and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so see how it looks like this bead is facing this way? That's just because of the tension that this jump ring wants to fold back to the right, but that's okay, because when we get to the end, we're going to reopen this jump ring and connect it back to the beginning. So don't worry about the fact that it's folded over, and you can kind of use that to make sure that you're working on the correct side as you go along with this. Okay, so this is a very simple weave. It does require a little bit of strong hands for sure, but other than that, it's very simple. Okay, so our bead and our O-ring, we're going to pick up starting the third row. I'm going to go from the outside to the inside. I pass underneath the bead, and then I pass through the other O-ring from the inside to the outside. Okay, and then I'm going to choke up on the starting point of my jump ring. And oops, don't need a bead, I need an O-ring. Okay, and I need another O-ring. And then I close. Okay, so that is all there is to this beaded stretch bangle. I'm going to do another row or two just so you can watch me do it. Pick up a jump ring, pick up a bead, and an O-ring. Okay, I pass through from the outside to the inside, pass under the bead, and come back out the other O-ring that's on the other side. And then at that point, I'll pick up my O-ring. Now, could you pick up an O-ring, a bead, and an O-ring to start? Yes, you can. But this is how I prefer to do it. This is how I find I get the best amount of space and room to work. But just for experimentation's sake, let's go ahead and do that. So don't let me get you confused. I'm picking up an O-ring, a bead, and an O-ring. Okay, so you can do it like this too, just to give you options if you prefer to do it this way. And I know this was a good time for me to do it because I noticed that this bead I just put on the last row was a little smallish. Okay, and then I'm going to pass through the two O-rings. I passed under the bead and closed. So I chose to do that on a row where I knew that my bead was a little bit on the small size. Of course, I'm using Czech beads. So the Czech beads are going to be, you know, a little bit more varied in size as I go along. So that gives me a little bit more option. But you see, this is just a very simple project to do. We're just going to keep going, and you'll notice that this is already starting to curl on me, which it will do with this weave, and it's going to all curl and spiral around, and that's probably the only part of this that's challenging to deal with, is keeping the working end out of my way as I add additional rows. But you see, I'm just going to keep going, adding rows, using a jump ring to pick up a bead. Oh, and I actually, here I got talking and I picked them up in the wrong order. So I need to pick up a bead and an O-ring. Okay, and when I pick this up, notice I can see on this end, this is my jump ring that's curling back, so I don't want to be working on that end. I'm going to pass through the first O-ring, pass through the second O-ring, pick up my next O-ring, and close the jump ring. Okay, so keep on doing this. I'm going to make a medium-sized one here, so that's going to be about 36 rows. So I'm going to use all 36 of my jump rings, all of my O-rings, and all my beads. And when I get to the length that I want this to be, I will come back and show you how to finish this into a bracelet. Okay, so you can see here that this is all curled and twisted up just like I said it would be. And that's not really a problem. That's what it's gonna do. I'm gonna stretch it out a little bit. I'm gonna find the beginning. I can tell that once again because this is the one that wants to fold back. And I'm going to just turn this jump ring until I can find the center. I closed it quite well, but I can see it there. And I'm gonna reopen this up again. Okay, and now I'm gonna stretch all this back out. I'm just trying to get it straight so I can make sure that when I go through this, that the bracelet's not twisted. Okay, and then I'm going to make sure I'm up at the tippy top. I still want to have a really good grip. And then we're just going to, this is just like doing a row, except for we don't have a bead at the front, but you can see it looks exactly the same way. There's no ring of bead and no ring. And we're just gonna pass through underneath the bead of the other end. Okay, and then I'm gonna go ahead and close this jump ring. And now our bracelet's complete. So it's still kind of curling up on me, but that's okay, because once I go ahead and stretch this all out, this is gonna be just fine. And it's gonna lay flat and straight and all those things. Okay, so this is what it's like with the 20 gauge 5/32 and with Czech seed beads, which have smaller holes. And then of course we changed our O-rings to a size 5, and that means these are a little bit thinner than our 6s. So that gives me a little bit more room so that when I brought the size of the jump ring down, I didn't need quite as much room. And then of course the bead is going to be smaller, but not necessarily this way smaller. So the bead's a little bit smaller this way. So I get a little tiny bit of room there from using just a hair smaller bead. So you can see though, this is the same bracelet, and this just opens up your options so that you can use another kind of bead that has a little bit smaller hole, and you're just adjusting for the sizes of the new jump rings that you need to use. Okay, so I hope you learned lots from this video. Please be sure to like and follow us. And of course, these kits are available at beadmeastory.com, as well as all the supplies to make this. So feel free to make this in any colors that you want to. The supply list will be in the description. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.